All right, let's get started. I'd like to call to order the August 17th meeting of the Harbor Commission. Would you like to take roll, Jeanette?
Yes, Jim Sloan,
Here.
Bill Spicer,
Here.
Betsy Kramer,
Here.
Lang Sly,
Here.
Shoham Yaniv,
Here.
and Merritt McRae will be absent tonight.
Okay. Scott, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we will not be seating Sabrina Krantz this evening. She was appointed to the commission by the council, but unfortunately, very late in the process, we discovered that she does not live within the city limits. And it was unfortunate that it slipped through because we did a full orientation and everything, but so she's not going to be joining us on the commission.
Okay, well, that's unfortunate. Okay, anything else? Okay. This is when we would normally open it up to public comment for those items that aren't on the agenda. And I don't see a lot of people in the audience, so we'll close that. Okay, approval of minutes. So moved. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? One abstention. Yeah, okay. Okay, that's passed.
Mr. Chair, probably 2 abstentions on account of Shoham was.
Right, we'll show 2 abstentions.
I abstain, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Why don't we move on to the director's report? Is that right? Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself here. The appointment of Shoham.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Yaniv has been appointed to serve a 4-year, no, not a 4-year term, a 2.5-year term expiring on December 31st, 2019. And that's because he's filling in from a commissioner that got off early. So he'll be filling out that term and then will be eligible for a 4-year term after that. Commissioner Yaniv is originally from Kibbutz Magan Mikael in Israel and came to Santa Barbara in 2004 after finishing his service in the Israeli army. From beach to the mountains, Santa Barbara reminds him a lot of where he was born and raised. And since living in Santa Barbara for 13 years, he's been involved in many activities and organizations such as outrigger canoe racing, especially spending many hours a week on the water and around the harbor. He's an active member in the Santa Barbara Outrigger Canoe Club, based there on West Beach, as you know, and currently works for a medical device company in Goleta, as well as owns a small catering company here in town. Besides his involvement with the Santa Barbara Outrigger, he's also very active with the Jewish Federation and most recently sat on the board for the Young Adult Division.
All right.
So please join us in welcoming Commissioner Yaniv to the Harbor Commission.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Good. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, or?
No.
Okay, not a problem. Just wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to. Okay, and then the next thing is, I guess we have some, to appoint a chair and vice chair, and then some committee assignments as well.
I'd move to appoint Jim Sloan, if he's willing to do it, and can we do both at once or not?
I think so. And I'd like to nominate Bill as vice chair.
I'll accept that.
Any other nominations or ideas? Okay.
Second?
Do we need a second? I don't know how to do this. Why don't you second it, and that way we're covered? All right. So I think we should probably vote on them separately,
Yeah, I think
and then that way the person being nominated doesn't vote, so. We okay? We have to turn the mics on. I know that, yeah, okay. All right, someone, you want to call the vote for chair? And
Sure, I'll do that. There's been a nomination and a second that Jim remains as chair for this next year, and all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays or abstentions?
Can I abstain?
Certainly.
Okay.
So that passes.
Okay. And then there's been a nomination and a second for Bill Spicer to be vice chair. And so all in favor of that? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And abstention?
I abstain.
Okay. So that's taken care of. The next item is the committee assignments. And for budget, this last year has been Betsy and myself. And I think I've spoken with Lang, and he has expressed an interest in being on that committee. I'm not sure if anybody else would like to be on that committee, if you would.
What committee is that? That's the budget committee?
Here,
Or the planning committee?
these are the committee assignments here. Do you have that list?
Is there a list in the packet?
Yeah, it's attached. Look for the little one that has the color. There you go.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, you got it.
Gotcha.
Yeah. We need, typically, we have 3 people on the committee, so right now, we currently would keep Betsy and myself and add Lang, unless someone else would like to do it, and then we can discuss.
Yeah, if you'd like to do it, I'm happy to get off it, but it's no problem.
Not much of a numbers guy, so if I can, if you need me, I'd be happy to step in, but if not, I can step back.
Okay, why don't we do this? We go through several budget processes throughout the year with updates and things
Sure.
like that, so why don't we keep the current one this year, I would suggest, and then perhaps next
Sure.
year, after you've seen
This,
some of the reviews
yeah,
and
that sounds
understand
Sure,
you
sure.
know,
Yeah.
the income and expenditure.
Sure.
And you can attend the budget meetings even though you're not on the committee.
Sure, sure.
It's important to know that.
yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Will do. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think any of these meetings are open to anybody, and they're open to the public as well to attend meetings. Okay, so I think, does that work? So why don't we leave that one and move on, and then we can vote on the whole slate? Does that make sense, or is that how we've done it in the past?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and then the chartering and BAP? Is that okay to leave alone? Does anybody
I'm
have a
comfortable.
desire?
I'm
Okay.
comfortable as is.
Okay, the Waterfront Electric Shuttle Committee, I think I might suggest that we remove that one because I think that program's over, or I don't think we've met in over a year. Does anybody have trouble with that? Scott, are you okay with that?
Yes, I don't expect anything that we wouldn't just bring to the full commission on that.
Okay.
You know, initially, it was thought that there would be some negotiating and some back and forth, and it just sort of happened, and it's done.
Right.
So
Right.
I don't think there's much purpose of keeping it there.
Yeah, it's kind of my sense of it as well. Okay. And then the LCP has 2 members, Betsy and myself, Coastal Coastal Program Update, excuse me. And that is kind of, it's been a year and a half now or so that project's been in the works, and I kind of see it wrapping itself up. And so unless someone wanted to come in at the 11th hour, might suggest that we leave that one, I don't know. Is someone interested in, I know that there's one meeting coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, there's going to be a meeting probably the week of the 13th. And then there's going to be a public hearing on September 30th is what they're planning to do. And I was going to give a little report, that delayed report from the May meeting at the end, but
Chair Sloan,
Yeah,
I'd just like to remind you subcommittee members that the city received a grant to to advance the local coastal plan process, not just the policy portion that's done, but they're going to put together an adaptation plan and economic impact analysis. And these are things that will be brought back to the full commission, and I'm not quite sure what the subcommittee involvement will be, but they're pretty important components of the LCP, especially adaptation planning. You know, what do you do with the harbor?
Right, okay,
So there may be more work to be done by a subcommittee.
okay,
I think after the next presentation by planning, they plan on coming back here in a couple months as well. There may have a better sense for how much work would be required, but there might be some fairly substantive issues to deal with and address coming up in the near future as part of that process.
okay. Well, why don't we leave that committee then and
That's what I'd suggest.
continue it, and maybe add someone to it. Would somebody, Shoham, would you like to join that?
What does the committee
Well, so
do?
we-
What is
so
it?
what-
What's the involvement of
What
the
this
local?
committee has done is it has attended some of the meetings that were held by the grant, the grantee of this in the city, other departments of the city, and we represent the harbor in those discussions. And so along with Carl and the people from staff that have done a lot of the work in looking at it, we take a look at some things. And Betsy was at the last meeting, I wasn't able to attend, and so.
Basically, we don't do anything. The committee members just sit there and listen.
Listen.
It's interesting to hear them
Sure.
say what they have to say.
And it's discussing things involving obviously the coast and Santa Barbara, the harbor, and
Right, so
Right,
the
but-
coastal commission is coming up with a new set of rules for coastal
Yeah.
communities. And so this is, Santa Barbara's opportunity to look at those and see, give some input to it, and then talk about, as Carl just mentioned, after it's done, maybe the implementation of some of
Yeah.
these. And so,
sure,
could be a longer term thing.
sure. Yeah, I'd be interested in partaking in that.
Okay? Is everybody good with that? Okay. Parking? Is this committee still valid? When was the last time it met? And should we keep this committee?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think we might as well leave this one intact. We're probably coming up on some more parking issues. It may be time to reconvene that committee.
Okay?
I'm good with that.
Yeah,
Are you good with that?
Yeah.
Anybody have a desire to be on that committee? If,
You want to be on the parking?
or should we have a merit?
I'd be happy to be on it. I don't think you need 4 or 5 people, but
Right,
if somebody
right.
wants off, I'd be happy to replace
Well, Merritt's not here to speak to it, so,
No, yeah,
if you're happy to stay on.
yeah, I'm happy to say I'm not here. So if you want to be on,
or we can just leave it the way it is.
If you leave it the way it is. I mean, I wouldn't want to try to displace Merritt if he wants to stay on here.
Right.
I didn't meet last year, so.
Yeah, turn on your mic if you don't mind. Everybody's
Too late.
mic on. Okay, that way it picks it up on the TV feed. Okay, so why don't we leave that one the way it is? RFP, Request for Proposal Selection Committee. Leave it the way it is, or does somebody have a desire to be on that one?
Who's on it now? I don't have a thing.
Merritt.
Jim and myself.
Okay.
We good? Okay. So I think just to reiterate, I think for budget, it would be Betsy, Lang, and myself. Chartering and BAP would be Betsy, Merritt, and Bill. We would dissolve the Downtown/Waterfront Electric Shuttle Committee. The LCP, we would add Shoham. Parking, we would leave it as is, and RFP would leave as. Is that good with everybody?
Yep.
Should we get a vote to just affirm that?
Yeah, should we get a second first?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Okay. I think I'll do it. Okay. Now, we can get back to what we I'm used to doing some of these things at the end, the recommendations and all the votings at the end, so sorry about that. Scott?
Okay, for the director's report this month, just an update on council actions. The council found it in the city's best interest to waive the formal bid procedure and authorize a purchase order with Work Incorporated for our janitorial services around the harbor for fiscal year 2018 in an amount not to exceed $320,000. And for fiscal year 2019 in an amount not to exceed $333,000. And these are the folks with various disabilities that you see around the harbor doing much of our janitorial in the restrooms, cleaning up, sweeping, doing all sorts of, and it's a really well-received program by the slip holders and the tenants down there. It's one of our biggest regular contracts, but we've looked at alternatives before from Service Master and others like that, and it's competitive and it's a good program. Also, the council adopted a resolution relating to the destruction of records held by the Waterfront Department, and that's just house cleaning type stuff. When the records go stale, we have a records retention requirement, and we're required to shred them after a certain period of time, and Jeanette dutifully shredded them. On to electric tricycles, and this is kind of an emerging issue, or an issue that has emerged recently. And commissioners may have noticed three-wheeled electric-powered tricycles buzzing around town. Actually, two types, and this first type here is these are I'll call them the buggies, and these are SB from Santa Barbara Buggy Rentals. These are gasoline-powered, and they're technically classified as a motorcycle. So they're street legal. The passengers and driver need to wear a helmet. But they are, I believe, registered in the state of California and so forth. So you'll see these all around town, pretty much, and they're rented down in the funk zone. But the ones that I wanted to talk about tonight were the three-wheeled electric-powered tricycles, which you can see in these pictures here. And the police department has received numerous complaints about these moped-type vehicles that can attain speeds of over 20, 25 miles an hour going down the beachway, on sidewalks, in parks, and various areas where things that go that fast really shouldn't be operating. Reckless driving on city sidewalks, etc. So parking lot staff met with various departments, including police, city attorney, parks and recreation, public works, and transportation regarding this safety hazard, which the public has been emailing about. And after careful review by the police department and the city attorney's office, several questions and concerns have been identified. Per the vehicle code, they must have license plates issued by the DMV and therefore VIN numbers and so forth. Functioning headlights, taillights, brake lights, all the normal things you'd have with a motorcycle or a moped. And additionally, all riders must wear legal helmets. And they may not be operated, since they're classified as a moped and not as an electric bicycle. They're being rented, or they were being rented as an electric bicycle, and they're not. And you can even see on this, well, you can barely make it out on the sign, it says, "Why pedal?" These electric vehicles are not equipped with pedals at all, and that's the definition of an electric bicycle. And so for that reason, they're classified as mopeds, and they cannot operate on a sidewalk, a bike path, or even in a bike lane adjacent to the street. They have to be out in the lanes of traffic, which is a whole separate issue. So the city attorney sent a letter to the owner, and we're working on seeing how we can come to an agreement on how these things are operated. As you can see in this case, they're parked in a red zone. But you can't write them a ticket because they don't have a license plate to ticket against, or a VIN number or anything. So it's kind of it's a tricky situation. And again, the folks riding in these and driving them need to be wearing helmets as well. So kind of something interesting that's just come up recently. Still working on that one. And tentative agenda for the September meeting, we have a lease agreement hopefully with the Santa Barbara Shellfish Company by that time. We've had a preliminary meeting with Shellfish, and we haven't identified any major issues. They're doing quite well out there on the wharf. having their best year ever. We'll be looking at FY17 budget results. Again, we had another good year, so it'll be good news. And we'll have a slip termination appeal in September as well. So that concludes my report, unless there are any questions.
No, just a comment. I was really glad to see this thing about the tricycles. I go along Shoreline frequently and Chase Palm Park even more frequently, and these tricycles, or whatever they are menaces. And so I hope something is done. Thank you.
Any other comments? I had a couple. One is, I'd just like to echo what you were saying about the work incorporated. I've received several comments from people around the harbor about what a good job they do, and it's nice to see them there. So appreciate that. Sorry. And then, how long do you keep records? What is a record retention policy?
Mr. Chair, it varies for the type of record that it is. Some things like leases and correspondence files for lease, are kept for the life of the business. That generally that might be there. But Jeanette would know better than I. Others, everything has a different set
Right,
of
but
2 years, 5 years, however long it may be.
So it's like that 2, 5, and then do we retain them digitally?
Generally not.
Okay,
Yeah, depends on the type. Some things are permanent, historical and permanent,
right,
but others, we have tons of, everything from treasury receipts, from parking,
right,
permit sales and things like that. We just need to purge out from time to time.
right,
This was an interesting case where a local individual saw the item come up on the council agenda. I've never had this happen before, and did a Public Records Act request. And we supplied him with 20 boxes of files to satisfy his Public Records Act request.
Right.
Virtually all of our records are public information,
Right,
and
right.
these were. And he came down to the department, and Jeanette sent him up in an office, and he brought his own scanner and had at it with the records. So
okay.
we satisfied the request and then shredded them an hour later.
Okay. And then one last thing. So you got me thinking about both the motorized buggies and the other ones. Do you need a motorcycle license to operate those things? Do you know?
Chair Sloan, my understanding is that it's a short-term rental and that you do not need a motorcycle license for that kind of use. That was the discussion, my best recollection of our discussion with that.
Okay.
Interestingly, I believe you do have to have a California driver's license, and it can't be from out of state, oddly enough.
Huh.
But,
Okay.
this is a weird area, and it was
Yeah,
very confusing, the various parts of the code
Right.
and how
right,
they apply to the electric trikes versus the gas-powered ones.
Right. And maybe a horsepower issue or something, because I know you
It
can't.
is.
You can't go down and run a Harley without a license.
Right.
Even if
True.
it's spring afternoon. So, okay. Just curious. All right. Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Moving ahead. Business services. Ryan.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. The Business Services Report this month has 2 brief items. The first is an update on the Castillo Street undercrossing project. As you may recall, the state of California's Department of Transportation, or Caltrans, closed the Castillo Street undercrossing on June 19th to conduct significant repair work, including the complete replacement of the entire road surface. Now, previous repair and replacement work has been short-lived, as we all know. It lasts for a little while and then kind of goes belly up. So this is, they're hoping the new design will last a little bit, well, significantly longer, actually, in meeting with the Caltrans folks. And the new design, again, it's concrete. It's going to be poured in one mass pour. Actually, it's already been poured. And what it does is it raises the road surface a few inches. You probably won't even notice it, but underneath the concrete is a thin membrane, an inch or 2, I believe, thick, that allows the water to percolate down and then capture the water and pump it out, as opposed to previous iterations where it comes up. So they're very hopeful that this is going to resolve the problem for some time. I don't know if there is a permanent solution in talking with the Caltrans folks, but they're doing their best to make it happen. We've worked with our Public Works staff as well as Caltrans staff to make sure that signage was appropriate and people could continue to find their way down to the waterfront and the harbor. So you've probably seen a lot of signage. It's never as much as we all want, but I think we've done the best we could. And it's scheduled to open the week of August 28th, so cross your fingers for that. They will, I believe tomorrow they start striping, so it takes a number of days. But the biggest process was they had a 28-day curing period for the concretes where it just had to sit there. So we're coming up on the end, and so that'll be a nice relief for everybody. Next in the business services report is just a quick update on the fiscal year 2018 and 2019 budget. The waterfront department's budget was approved along with the rest of the city budget on June 27th. And wanted to thank you all for sitting through many presentations on the budget over, it seems like every month is a budget presentation, but thank you for your patience and your guidance with that. We've got a very busy year ahead of us. Fiscal year 18 includes funding of approximately $3.9 million in capital projects, including the completion of the Marina One renovation project, or Phase 8. So that's exciting. I should also let you know, as well as the folks at home, that the Waterfront Department is an enterprise fund, and as such, the Waterfront Department does not receive financial subsidies or help from the city, from the general fund. And so we generate our own revenues, we're in charge of our own expenditures, and so as with prior years, a few fee increases were necessary in order to keep our projects up and to maintain the harbor and Stearns Wharf. And our two increases this year include a slip fee increase of 2%, which has been standard for the past, I believe, 7 years, and also a slip transfer fee increase of $25 per foot for slips over 30 feet in length. So with that, we embark on a new fiscal year. And again, it was a 2-year budget plan, but we'll have another bite at the apple in the early part of calendar year 2018. So if any changes, if we see things going south, north, anything in between, we can come back and make some changes. So that's something you all should know. And then also, as Scott mentioned, next month, we'll be doing a wrap-up of fiscal year 17. And again, as Scott said, it's good news. So
Good.
That'll keep you on the edge of your seat.
Yeah, there you go.
And I'm happy to answer any questions if you
The
have.
suspense is going to come.
Yeah, I'm sure.
What is the slip transfer fee after this mentioned increase?
I believe it's $450
Okay.
per foot.
Any other questions, comments?
I'm just curious to know if the harbor businesses have seen any negative effect from when Caltrans started their work to now. Has business been affected by that at all? Or the businesses, have they said anything?
Chair Sloan, Commissioner Yaniv, that's a great question. I think it's too early to tell. I don't want to leak too much into next month's presentation, but it's been a mixed bag, to be honest, as far as the restaurants are concerned. Some up, some down, but we'll get our August figures, at the end of this month,
Cool.
so we'll be able to have a better idea on that. Summer's always a very busy month, so
Yeah.
what I can do is go back and compare June, July, and August of this year with last year, and I'll make a note of that to come back next month with that information. We'll see where
Thank you.
things stood. Overall, it's good. Again, though, some businesses were up and down. I'm not sure if that's going to be related to the Castillo Underpass project or the fact that, we had a wet winter, and it just so happened that a lot of the wet came on big weekends, President's Day weekend, which were usually good weekends for restaurants and things like that. And when you get hit with 6 inches of rain, people aren't real likely to come on down.
Yeah.
Don't want to sit outside.
So I'll bring that information next month.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Well, I think we had some good news. They finished up the construction right there at the foot of the wharf there. So that was from a road construction standpoint. They opened that up, and so that might have had an offsetting effect. So. Okay, anything else? All right, moving ahead. Carl?
Good evening, Chair Sloan and Commissioners. The first project I'll report on this evening is our Stearns Wharf Heavy Timber and Pile Replacement Project. It's one of our larger annual capital improvements that we do every year. And I'm going to start off with a little sort of an anatomy of the wharf. This was at the request of Commissioner McCray. I'm sorry he's not here tonight, but maybe he can go back and take a look at this. Come on. So if you're not familiar with the structure of a wharf, most wharves are put together in what we call bents, or rows of piles. And every row of piles are, in Stearns Wharf, they're 14-inch diameter piles that are 60 feet long. They're pressure treated with a compound called ACZA, zinc, copper, and a couple other things associated with that acronym. And they're also coated with a polyurethane product, which is a plastic-type product which prohibits water and air and everything else from getting into the pile itself. We used to wrap them periodically, but what this does is it prevents intrusion and it prevents rot associated with shipworms and those kind of things. So they've done this for probably about 5 or 6 years now, and it's a much better method of preserving wooden piles for a long time. The next part of the structure are the pile caps. They're 12 by 12 inch pressure treated Douglas fir. Then we have stringers. These are supposed to denote 4 by 16 inch boards on edge. And then we have the deck boards on top. It's important to note that it's a little more complicated than just wooden piles. We have 4 different types of piles out on the wharf that we use. Wooden piles that I just mentioned are over here, and this is the wrapping. Thunderbird or Thunderbolt is the firm that coats these piles. We also have splice piles, and these are piles that are used underneath buildings. As you can imagine, underneath a building you can't open up the deck and drive a new pile with conventional pile driving techniques. So whenever a pile is washed away in a storm underneath the building, we have to put something new in, and it's put in pieces. And this picture kind of represents that. This stub is jetted into the seafloor about 10 feet, and then there's another piece put on, and then another piece, and these are collars and straps and attached to the pile caps. And they're pretty strong. It's not ideal, but it's kind of the only way to support the buildings. We have a pretty serious program associated with installing fiberglass pile jackets. So when piles start to wear and break down, they tend to hourglass, as you can imagine. So they lose cross structure and they lose strength. What we do is we wrap a fiberglass jacket around it and we fill it up with a cementatious product, and it kind of restores the cross section of the pile. And this is all done under buildings. This is really close to the elevator shaft under the Harbor Restaurant, as a matter of fact. And part of a project I'll talk about later tonight is we kind of deal with this proactively now into the buildings. All those piles are about 30 years old at least. And so we try to install 16 of these a year, which will really increase the useful life of these piles into the buildings. And finally, we have a few still piles out there. They are under the Moby Dick's restaurant and the Ty Warner Sea Center. These were installed after those 2 areas burned down. And the design consideration was to put something in more substantive or formidable than wood, and so they were installed with steel. And we also do a little bit of work on those as well. A few statistics for you. Out on Stearns Wharf, there's 158 bents. That's 158 rows of piles that vary from about 40 to about 120 feet in length, depending on where you are. There's 2,309 piles on any given day. After the winter, there may be a few less, and then we put them back. The length of pile caps, about 7,900 feet. That's 1.5 miles. Stringers are the ones that run along the length of the wharf. It was over 40,000 feet. And there's about 4 acres of deck boards. So it's a lot of wood, and it costs a lot of money to maintain. This year, we just completed the project. Schock Construction Company finished up. They replaced 19 piles, 37 linear feet of pile cap, not very much, and a variety of stringers, and about 110 deck boards. We try to replace proactively about 300 deck boards a year. The overall labor material cost was $371,000 by Schock. It's slightly under budget. We had $400,000 budgeted, and it also includes damage to 2 piles that Mick will tell you about from a boating accident that we had earlier. And it's a little under budget. We normally replace about 30 piles a year, so this is a little less damage than we normally get, which is kind of good. All the material is procured by the waterfront and then provided to the contractor, and that's a labor-only contract. We keep a heavy timber inventory. The equivalent of replacing, I believe it's 3 bents on the roadway. So if you had a terrible storm or boat slammed through it, we could go back and replace a pretty substantive section to reopen the wharf. So that's our strategy behind that. And Stearns Wharf is really our most vulnerable and our most valuable asset. I think our estimate for insurance purposes is about $60 million to replace this. So it's a pretty big and pretty expensive structure for us. Our next project this evening is it's a program related to minor capital improvements. So the city has a pretty robust capital improvement program, and I've presented it to you about every 2 years. And in general, the definition of a capital improvement is a project that costs over $100,000 and lasts for over 5 years. And as I mentioned, the Stearns Wharf maintenance is one of those, and Marina One is another one. But we have quite a few smaller projects that cost less than $100,000, and they are wind up with facilities that last over 5 years, so we call them minor capital improvements. We had 22 identified in fiscal year 2017, and we finished 18 of them, 82%. We have a performance objective associated with our budget of 80%, so we met that objective this year, which is nice because we didn't quite make it last year. We had 22 projects, but I'm going to talk about these. Just they represent the wide range of things we do, so I'll just go through these quickly to give you an idea of what our staff works on. These are our self-pay stations. Luke is the manufacturer of these. And these are in what we call our ABR lots. That's the Architectural Board Review. And this is the Harbor West lot and the Ledbetter lot. And this year we underwent design review and installed additional Lukes. They're blue because that's what ABR wanted. We added more because the program had been successful, but we wanted to try to meet the needs of the parking public so there'd be more accessible, less lines on night moves and those kind of nights. And this is a staff project. We work with our parking staff, Brian's staff, on this, and they've worked really quite well. As part of that, we were able to get rid of the kiosk at Ledbetter parking lot, and so we got rid of the building and revegetated it with the help of our parks department. So that's kind of a nice improvement associated with this as well. We redecked our dive boat this year. It doesn't seem like a big deal to most people, but that is the workhorse of the fleet right there. We spend several months a year doing all kinds of things like inspecting piles, installing fiberglass pile jackets, the utilities in the marinas. A lot of them are in the water, and we have a dive crew and they do a great job, and this boat gets worked to death. It doesn't make it more than about 2 years without having to replace the deck and the pontoons and the railings and everything else. So we like it and we put it to good use. Another project that Commissioner Yaniv is familiar with is the boardwalk along Sea Landing. We put that in last year as an alternative access to West Beach, especially when there are cruise ship visits, when the sidewalk is fenced off. This was a project done entirely by staff, something kind of new and unique for us. We also repurposed some tile mosaics that were taken out of the sidewalk along Cabrillo Boulevard as part of a gas company project. So it's kind of a neat amenity and a neat improvement, and I'd like to think people enjoy it. And it's modeled on some boardwalks that Scott and I had seen down in Santa Monica, and heavily used, very popular, and we're kind of proud of this one. It was a good job by our staff. They worked very hard on it. Marina 4B redecking. So Marinas 2 through 4 are made out of wood. Marina 1 is all concrete. Our staff is capable of replacing one finger at a time as opposed to these major multi-million-dollar capital outlays. And so we have an objective of replacing 10 fingers a year. We've done Marina 2, we're working on Marina 4, and then we'll move to Marina 3. It's a pretty good project if you live out there because wooden docks get full of splinters and they get wobbly and things like that, so it's a nice improvement. We've done some minor things that people wouldn't recognize. Wherever there's a pile guide, we use a plastic product called UHMW to support the docks instead of rollers. It's much better, and we can frame it in and make it look real nice. So this is an improvement that we will continue to do year after year after year until maybe in the future there'll be a large capital outlay to replace it completely. But in the meantime, this is a pretty good improvement. Another project we did, this was done by a contractor as part of the heavy timber project on Stearns Wharf. This is a lift station underneath Stearns Wharf. We have 3 lift stations. They pump wastewater from the restrooms and the restaurants to the main sewer trunk on Cabrillo Boulevard. They're below the deck. They're exposed to waves. They take a beating. They cannot fail for obvious reasons. We can't have our sewer system go down in the ocean. That would be catastrophic. So we work hard on making sure that they function properly, all the components do. But what we did this year is we replaced that platform that they're sitting on. And that was a pretty big job. It's not that easy to suspend the old one, build a new one underneath it, and keep everything up and running at the same time. But we feel good about it because we do get large waves every year, and these things, you could never stand down there in the middle of winter as waves just smash through there. And they have to stay up and they have to keep running. We have, as I've mentioned before, over 1 million visitors a year on the wharf, and the facilities get used quite frequently. Another project, our wharf parking kiosk at the foot of Stearns Wharf, we replaced that this year. This was another staff project. We bought the booth prefabricated at a place down in Los Angeles, but we had to rebuild the whole foot of the wharf. A lot of the work was done at night to make sure the wharf stayed open during the day. This kind of gives you an idea how a wharf is made up. These are stringers. This is a pile cap down here, and then you put deck boards on the top. It's a lot of work. These things are really, really heavy. It's hard to do, and it took took over a week to do this project. But we worked with our parking staff again and kept the wharf open the whole time, and the finished product looks great. It's a much, much better facility to work in. So as I mentioned, we had 22 minor capital improvement projects for 2017. We spend about $300,000 a year fairly consistently, and the funds come out of our Harbor Preservation Fund, which is our capital fund, and then our facilities operating budget, so it's a combination of the two. And it's a good program. We continue to invest in our waterfront infrastructure, and it's a good measure of our facilities division productivity. And finally tonight, as Scott mentioned and Chair Sloan, anybody who's a regular at the waterfront recognizes these folks. These are members of Work Incorporated. Work Inc. is associated with the United Cerebral Palsy group from Los Angeles, Ventura, and Santa Barbara. And they employ all kinds of folks with some developmental difficulties. These folks do a great job. They work very, very hard. They maintain 20 restrooms. They pick up all the trash in all the marinas, and they sweep all the sidewalks. So they're very, very busy. And this is 365 days a year. They're under close supervision. It provides great opportunity for people that wouldn't otherwise have employment opportunities. And we are going to celebrate our 25th anniversary this year on September 25th with these guys. So this is a collaboration that's been going on for a long, long time that both the Waterfront and Work Inc. are quite proud of. As Scott mentioned, the contract is $320,000 for this year. It is very competitive with the private sector. We do employ private sector for custodial work on other restrooms throughout the harbor. So it's pretty competitive. This is something that council supports. They like this collaboration and this relationship. And every one of these folks is hardworking, cheerful, and they take pride in their work. So if you're ever down at the harbor and you see one of them, take your time, stop and say hello, and you'll be greeted with a delightful person. That concludes my report this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a question about the lift stations. It looked like maybe those are duplexed. Are they duplexed? And of course, this would only happen at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. But what if there's a failure? What happens then?
Chair Sloan, Commissioner Sly, you're right. There's two pots. If one goes down, you can kind of work through the other one will function. And you're also right. They break down pretty much every Friday at 4 p.m. is when they break down. They don't every Friday, but they have. So it's really a major concern for us. But we spend a lot of time. We replace a lot of the component parts, the valves and everything else, so we kind of stay ahead of them to the extent we can. And there is a redundancy with two, what we call pots. So, and there's alarms, and so when they go down, we get staff down there right away and try and repair them as quickly as possible.
What's the lifespan of the lift stations? How long before you have, or how many years do you have before you have to replace them?
Chair Sloan, Commissioner Yaniv, they were installed when the wharf was reopened in 1980.
Wow.
The one under Moby Dick's was installed after it burned down, so that was 1998, I believe. So it's a different type. It's electronic. The old ones, it's kind of old technology, but it's kind of like a car with an old engine that's easy to repair and get parts for. They're pretty reliable, and we were going to replace them all a few years ago and decided that we would wind up with a more complicated system that we weren't as confident in maintaining. So we're going to stick with these for a while and do things like replace and repair the platform and the component parts. So I'm really not sure how long they'll last, but we look at them every day, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
When it looks like we can't keep them up anymore, we'll replace them.
Thank you, Carl, and congrats on your association with Work Inc. I had a couple questions. One's just curiosity. On the pilings, how deep into the seabed do those go?
Chair Sloan, Commissioner Spicer, the specification has to do with how many times you hit it with a hammer. So when you hit it with the pile hammer and you, I think 20, what we call blow counts, and you have a foot of penetration, that's the load bearing. That's how you calculate the load bearing on it. The depth of embedment probably varies from 25 feet to 10 feet, depending on what you kind of hit in the seafloor. But in most of them, you get probably well over 20 feet.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
And then my other question is materials. Does steel pile make sense moving forward? Would we want to move to all steel over the next 50 years?
You know, it's possible. The steel piles were only done as part of a complete wharf rebuild in those sections. As we replace one pile at a time, wood is easy to work with, it lasts a long time, and it's much less expensive, and we can do it. I don't know, I honestly don't know what the design considerations were to rebuild Moby Dix in the Sea Center and go with steel piles, other than that's how you make oil rigs, and they're resilient and they last a long time. But an incremental replacement, when in a bent of piles, let's say a row of 8 piles, we'll replace one every 5 years. So it would be a little bit odd to go with steel, because the entire component is steel, the piles, the cap, and then they usually have a concrete deck.
Got it.
So I'm not quite sure how you would incrementally replace them with steel.
Okay. And then my last material question. So I just returned from Oregon and worked on a deck, and we replaced the wood deck with Trex. And I was just curious on your wooden deck walkways, if you've looked at the Trex or the synthetic wood material at all for any of the walkways.
We have. We looked at them for the marinas, marinas 2 through 4. For the wooden walkway, we kind of like the wood. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's nice. I've walked on Trex walkways down at Doheny Beach, as a matter of fact, and they're pretty nice. They get kind of hotter than wood, actually.
They do.
But we didn't go with the Trex type products, the recycled plastic products, for our decks when we started redecking the marinas years ago. It's a lot heavier than wood, and we would wind up marrying 2 different products because we do one finger at a time. And the buoyancy calcs are a little bit different, so we just decided to go with wood. We have looked at it. They're pretty good, but we really haven't incorporated them into our facilities other than for bull rails out on the wharf, because they last a long time. So we've looked at them, but we never dove all the way in using that product before.
All right, great. Thanks. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anything else? I just had one question update. A few months ago, we talked about the sand building up there off of West Beach. How was that resolved?
Chair Sloan, Scott and I met with the LA District Corps of Engineers last week. He's going to give you an update next month on that. Talked about contractual issues, funding, and a whole host of other things. I've initiated a soil sampling program that's going to get started pretty soon to characterize the sediments. It's a first step in the process to get it dredged. Our plan is to dredge it, piggybacking on the Corps of Engineers contract this year. We'd like to try and do it in the fall. That might be a little too soon. It may have to go in the spring, but it's definitely on our radar. We'll be going to council with that, and of course coming back to you when the plan is a little better formulated.
Has it caused any problems?
Not so much in the summertime. In the summertime, the really low tides are in the middle of the night. In the wintertime, they're in the middle of the day. So you have a little more water covering it in the summertime. This winter is a problem, and we're concerned about it, and that's why we'd really like to do it in the fall, but it's contingent upon approval by the regulatory agencies for our existing permits to confirm that our sampling and analysis is done adequately, and a few other things. We have some contractual issues to work out with the Corps and the contractor.
Okay.
You'll be hearing more about it, I can assure you.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's not going away, I don't think. Okay. That's Nick, Harbor Operations.
Not going away.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Unfortunately, I have to start my report tonight with a couple of sad events. One actually ended tragically. The other could have ended tragically. We had 2 boating accidents last month near or around the harbor. One, the first one you're seeing on the screen was actually captured by a photographer on the wharf. That occurred on Sunday, July 2nd, when a 24-foot rigid-hulled inflatable boat came into the Y of the wharf, that's between the main roadway and the shoreward finger, at a high rate of speed and was unable ultimately to make the turn at the Y and slammed into a couple of pilings and took out the ladder. And surprisingly, despite what you see in this picture, there's a woman with her feet straight in the air going overboard. Somebody's already gone overboard on the bow. Nobody was injured and nobody was fatally injured. But that being said, everybody got out safely. A couple folks got back in the skiff. One person climbed up the ladder. And we took it very seriously, of course. The operator of the boat, Paul Norrie, who's a slip permittee in Santa Barbara Harbor, was cited for misdemeanor hazardous operation of the vessel, reckless and negligent, operation of the vessel. He's still working through the end of the court process on that. We met with him today, and he told the director and myself that he's been approved for a program where he'll get some education and then misdemeanor charges will ultimately be dropped. Our officers determined he was not intoxicated, so intoxication was not an issue here. But we're all very, very fortunate that besides losing 2 pilings and a ladder, that nobody was hurt or killed. He has to pay restitution for this accident, for the damage that was done, and I think it amounts to something in the neighborhood of $22,000. So he'll be receiving a bill for that. So that was accident number 1. In the second accident, a week later to the day, on July 9th, that one occurred aboard a 15-foot sailboat east of Stearns Wharf, actually about a mile offshore, south and east of Stearns Wharf. All 4 passengers on that 15-foot sailboat went into the water. Jet skis and other boats came to their aid and rescue. Some other folks, actually, some boaters jumped in the water to render assistance. Harbor Patrol was on the scene. And unfortunately, the owner and operator of the vessel, Mr. Ashok, was ultimately perished in this accident. We worked on him all the way to the launch ramp with AED and CPR, and by the time he was transported to the hospital, he had deceased. So needless to say, I know you join Santa Barbara City staff in extending our most sincere condolences to Mr. Ashok's family and friends. This was a very, very unfortunate event. Back to back, we had unfortunate events, and so cross our fingers that the rest of the summer and the rest of the year remains safer on the water. Going back a couple months, since we haven't met in a couple months, sort of getting in the Wayback Machine, we were lucky to have a record attendance and vendors at the swap meet this year, the Harbor Nautical Swap Meet on May 13th. We had 76 vendors, which is 18 more than we had in the previous year, which itself was a record. So you can see that these are getting more and more popular with every year, especially for the vendors. And there was the usual throng of folks coming down looking for deals on paddle boards and kayaks and fishing gear and boat gear, pumps, motors, you name it. And it's just great to see, because people mark their calendars, they come down, they walk away with everything you can imagine as they gear up for boating season. And as always, as we've done in the last several years, we had a companion event with this, which was a hazardous waste disposal opportunity. And that was a big success too. They took in hundreds of gallons of hazardous waste. This, as always, this is an opportunity to buy stuff for your boat, get rid of stuff you don't want in your boat at the swap meet, and then get rid of stuff in your dock box, hardening paints and old varnish and what have you, to clear that out and make room for your next paint job in your next boating season. So that's the way it is with boating. So both were a terrific success. And, of course, this was a benefit for the Harbor Merchants Association. And the great news there is, with close communication and coordination with them, the donuts lasted to the end this year. Though I'll admit there was an enforcement component of that as well, with tongs that could be whacked on people's wrists if they took more than one donut. I'm joking. We didn't do that, but we asked folks to take their fair share and move on. We also had distributed a bunch of free goodies from the Department of Boating and Waterways, including reusable water bottles, the ABCs of Boating Law, which is an invaluable little pamphlet on boating law. If we have them at the office, if you care to get one. Bilge pads, bilge pillows, and West Marine coupons and reusable tote bags. So it's a kind of a great community combination event of 3 different things: education, hazardous materials, drop-off, and the swap meet itself. So finally, next to finally, on this more celebratory front, 4th of July was a great success too. We had basing our activities on the success of the last couple years, the centerpiece of which was family-friendly music on West Beach. People started coming at 10 a.m. We had a more police presence than we'd had in years past, the last few years, and good weather didn't hurt. And thousands of people came down to enjoy the activities on West Beach and on Stearns Wharf. Overall, it was a terrific success. Law enforcement contacts were at an absolute minimum. The fireworks went off essentially flawlessly, and it really was a great team effort with other city departments. Parks, of course, included, and PD, and the waterfront, and others, and streets. Public Works, those folks were fantastic. They jumped right on the debris and litter along with our maintenance staff the morning after. In fact, the night of even, and we're getting debris down to the little finest shreds of fireworks debris off of the beach. And the winds were benign, and all turned out really great for that. And we also, recently, we had our seminal yacht race of the season, our King Harbor race. 75 boats headed over the horizon on July 28th on the 81-mile course from Santa Barbara to King Harbor. And it was a light wind year. It seems like a while we've had light wind years. We haven't really had a good, steady wind for a few years. So the times were a little slower. It took about 20 hours for the first boats to get down to King Harbor. But I would be remiss if I didn't note some locals who did very well on this race. They included Vance Newell aboard the Epic, got 4th overall in the race, which is not bad out of 75 boats. Dick Freeland on the Sundowner was 8th overall, also a good place. John Vincent and Ken Keating on the Argo 3 came in 3rd in the ultralight displacement Hull B category. You can ask Carl what that means. He's the sailor in the group. Tom Cullen on the Fuego 2 in the Performance Handicap Racing Fleet A class. And Lander Nicolay, it was second on the second wind, was 3rd overall in the cruising class. So we congratulate all those folks who participated locally and especially those who did really well. And again, it went off very, very well. Good coordination with the Yacht Club this year. It keeps on getting smoother and smoother, the communication and the assignment of slips and all that goes with the Yacht Club race. And finally, it's never too early at this time of year to mark your calendar for the Harbor and Seafood Festival. I shuddered with joy and fear at the same time as I mentioned that. But the 16th Harbor and Seafood Festival will take place from 10 to 5 on Saturday, October 14th. And if you love last year's festival and the year before and the year before that, you're going to love this one too. We got it all again. The lobster, the crab, oysters, mussels, barbecued albacore, paella sea urchin, free sea urchin uni, fish tacos, Brophy Brothers clam chowder, and much, much more. Of course, there's great music. There'll be 3 bands on the main stage, 40-plus arts and crafts vendors, and lots of educational booths on the city pier. A lot of the same folks, when I send out the invitation to return, they hit the reply button within an hour. They love it. They want to be back. And so we can look forward to that as well. The festival itself, as usual, is presented by the Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara, Inc., the City of Santa Barbara, the Santa Barbara Harbor Merchants Association, and the Santa Barbara Maritime Directions. So for directions, especially parking directions and information about the Harbor Festival, you can go to harborfestival.org. That's harborfestival.org. Or you can find details on our website at Santa Barbara CA. You can look it up, just, Google the city, bring up the city's website, go to departments, go to waterfront, go to events, and it's all right there, the Harbor Festival information. And I will be back to remind everybody of this again next month, because it'll be my last chance. But we're looking forward to a terrific event this year, and I look forward. I'd be I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Questions? Anybody? I had one question that relates to a couple of things on here, but it's a little bit off topic. So I understand that there's new boating licensing requirements coming out. Have the department received any direction from the state, or do you know anything about that?
Chair Sloan, I'd be happy to come back with more. I did a preview of this several months ago, and I'd be happy to come back with this again next month as a refresher. Yes, they have rolled out the program. I believe it goes into effect January of 2018. And it's a rolling phase-in with the youngest boaters first, and then each year an older set of boaters. And to get a boating card, which will be required for operating a vessel in California waters, you need to take an online test. But that's a good reminder, and I'll come back with an update on those exact steps and the nature of the program next month.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think
Sure.
a lot. I'm sure we're curious, and the public's curious as well.
Sure.
So appreciate that. Okay. Anything else? All right. Let's move on to new business. We have a recommendation
Yes.
or an item to read? I'm sorry.
Item 8, lease agreement with Harbor Market. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and recommend to City Council approval of a 5-year lease with one 5-year option with Lisa Clegg and Shauna Franks doing business as Harbor Market for the 676 square foot convenience store located at 125 Harbor Way, Suite 8, at a base rent of $2303.70 per month, subject to annual cost of living adjustments or 6% of gross sales, whichever is greater.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. This is our one lease on today's agenda. Lisa Clegg has operated the 676 square foot Harbor Market on the first floor of the Marine Center building since 1991. The current lease expired this past April, on April 30th, and she's currently on a month-to-month holdover status, which is permitted by the lease. There weren't any issues associated with the negotiation. There were some health issues that folks were dealing with, so we waited, and here we are today. Now, the basic lease terms are, as Jeanette indicated, term of 5 years is the initial term with one 5-year option, a little over $2,300 per month in rent, or, as was indicated, we have a percentage rent clause in there as well, so you're either paying the base rent or 6% of gross sales, which is ever greater. I should let you know that the Harbor Market percentage rent clause is the same as our other percentage rent clause with the Launch Ramp convenience store, so they're on par with each other. Ms. Clegg is considered by the department to be a tenant in good standing, as she's always prompt with her payments, and she has no lease compliance problems on file. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, she's been there since 1991. She's a fixture in the harbor, and her daughter will now be joining her as a co-owner of the property, or not of the property. That's our property, but of the business and the lease.
Okay. Yeah.
Just real quick, Brian, do they get into the percentage payments usually, or is it just base rent?
Commissioner Sloan, that's a good question, Mr. Spicer. So they usually only get into the percentage rent arena 2 times a year.
During Harbor Festival?
You got it. One is the month of October. They hit the percentage rent because they have a very, very, very busy day there. And then the other is July with July 4th. So those are generally the 2 percentage rent months.
Oh, good for them.
Yes.
Thank you.
What was the base rent of the prior lease? If you have that there.
Commissioner Sloan, Chair Sloan, Commissioner Sly, it's generally right about the same. So when we go from when one lease is up, and then in this case we're doing a whole new lease, it bumps up a few percentage points, but not a whole lot. We kind of keep them on the path upward,
Okay.
unless it's extremely out of touch with the current market rate, which it's not. So we generally have a consistent move forward with all of our leases. And again, unless there's a discrepancy, and then we play catch up.
One other question. Do the various harbor authorities talk to each other about, not price fixing, of course, but is there any exchange of information about what levels of rent are for different types of tenants in different areas along the coastal harbors?
Along other harbors? I'm not sure what their communication is with other harbors and other businesses and other harbors. As far as within our own harbor, the folks who run similar operations, obviously this is all public, but in addition to this, they kind of talk and understand where everybody's at. So that helps, keep an even playing field throughout whatever industry you're in, whether it's the convenience stores, the restaurants, the percentage rents are the same. So we try and keep it even amongst everybody.
So elaborating on that a little bit. So there's no, you don't have an opportunity to look at what level of rents would be in Oceanside or Oakland or some other harbor that.
Again, that's a great question.
Do you have a sense of kind of where we are relative to the rest of the world as to how expensive these spaces are? I mean, they're obviously cherished. I mean, there's only one place to do it here, so.
Chair Sloan, Commissioner Sly, that's a great question. I have not done any of that research to other harbors and what they're charging. Again, with things like Oceanside, we would have to tailor ours, or at least compare apples to apples and have it be a public marina. I don't think we have access to private marinas and how they do their leasing activity, but that's a great question. Maybe Mr. Reedman, based on his history here, and has some additional insight.
Commissioner Sly, we get a lot of inquiries from appraisers and other harbors about what our rates are, and we tend to have higher percentage rates. For example, our restaurants are 10% of gross sales. Most of our businesses are 10% of gross sales, which you'll find is higher than most places. Other municipal harbors will have 5 or 6% of gross sales. A good example being Brophy Brothers Ventura operation. We get 10% of gross sales on Brophy's up to $3 million and 11.4% after above $3 million in gross sales, which they always exceed by far. In Ventura, I believe they pay 5% of gross sales. So that's why we get a lot of inquiries into what we're doing, because others, would like to get there, but we kind of lead the pack on that. For example, the International Council of Shopping Centers publishes a thick book by region, by type of store, by size of store. Typical rent is $30 a square foot. The typical tenant improvement allowance is this. A typical percentage rent is 6%. And so there's a formal way to compare how other folks are doing relative to your level of rents. And I just wondered, I know there's not a book on this for marinas, but I just wondered if there was any informal system where you could kind of evaluate what you're doing relative to other areas. So, thanks.
Commissioner Sly, I can add a little bit of information to that. There are two primary harbor professional associations, harbor and port professional, 3 actually, but 2 ones coast-wide, statewide, that we participate in. Carl is a member of one, represents as our liaison to one, I'm to the other. One is the California Association of Harbor Masters and Port Captains. That's almost primarily public harbors and marinas, and the other is the Marina Recreation Association, which is private. And we have those discussions a lot, especially the folks who are on the business side of things and are working with our vendors who are associate members of these associations. And what I've seen, though I don't participate a lot in those discussions because I'm in the operations part of things, but what I see and hear coming out of those at dinner and what have you, is that one of the biggest challenges, and I think Scott alluded to it here, is that every harbor, harbors are so unique in and of themselves. Every harbor, every marina might be owned by the yacht club, might be part of a master lease, might be public, might be private, may have different sources of different income streams, different expenditure requirements and what have you, different levels of occupancy, different demand. And it's really interesting. It's hard to standardize. That book that you referenced there, it's hard to make one of those, but there is a lot of compare and contrast, and I know a lot of members of those associations go back to their ports and marinas and make adjustments and network with each other to try and maximize what they can out of those leases and rents. Sure.
Okay, we have a recommendation here. Would someone like to?
Yes, I would forward that we accept this.
Okay. Do I have a second? Second. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Okay, passes unanimous. All right. Any commission staff communications on your side, Scott?
Mr. Chair, I just remind the commission that this weekend is the Wine and Roses Charity Regatta. So parking will be a little tight down at the harbor this weekend. It's going to be a big weekend, particularly in the Harbor West area. But it's always an exciting race, and hopefully they get some good wind, and it's a fun weekend. So that's coming up.
Good. Yes.
I mentioned that I was going to say something about the LCP update, but it was back in May, and I kind of forgot the details at this point. But what was impressive about it, among other things, was how much work the city staff is doing, the planning staff is doing, and working with the Coastal Commission. And I really would recommend, when it comes up to the public hearing on the 30th, that as many people as possible attend that. And by our next Harbor Commission meeting, there will have been another meeting, and it'll be a little bit fresher in my mind. But apropos of the distance between our Harbor Commission meetings, I was wandering down around the waterfront the other day and talked to one of the business owners there, and we were chatting about how there weren't any Harbor Commission meetings. And we were sort of laughing about it, and I said, well, there's obviously nothing for us to do. And what he said, and I thought I'd pass it on, was that he's so impressed at the work that you guys, the staff, does from the top, Scott, on down. And he said there aren't any problems. And he was very, very praising of you guys. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. It's nice.
I won't say who it was who said it, but I'm sharing it.
Yeah.
So I've got one.
Yes, please.
I did have one more question. I understand there was a shark encounter, and I was just curious. I think everybody knows that they can be anywhere at any time, but what is our protocol when they're spotted? And I guess how close, and what is the protocol? And if that's a deeper question than just right now, you can come back for next month.
Commissioner Spicer, and I'm happy to come back with more detailed response. We, working in concert with the aquatic supervisor for the Parks and Recreation Department, the Harbor Patrol supervisor, and myself, we have come up with a whole matrix, if you will, for how to post, when to post, what signs. There are various different signs we post, the duration of the posting. For example, on one end, you might have a shark attack on a person would warrant a beach closure, right? Which thankfully we haven't had. A shark behaving aggressively or tearing apart a marine mammal with a half a mile of shore is another protocol. A shark swimming, a non-aggressively behaving shark 3/4 to a mile offshore is another protocol. And so, but if you'd like, I can come back next month and we can talk about the overall program and the response. I think most of us, I can even talk about what we know about why there's so many sharks around, but whatever be your preference. But we do have protocols, and it's based on, it starts with determining whether or not the shark sighting is a verified white shark and confirming that, and then we move from there. Because it could be somebody staying on the bluffs with a pair of binoculars sees something splash in the water 3/4 of a mile offshore. We're not going to close the beaches all the way to the other end of the scale. So it's a process. If you'd like to know more about it, I can certainly report back.
I think in the interest of public safety, and since we did have a encounter, I think that'd be great. I'd appreciate it.
Sure, be happy to.
Thank you.
Okay, seems like Mick's getting all the action items today. So, all right, anything else? Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
All right. Second?
Second.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.